let me also start recording on. Have you guys started recording on your, or you're not recording? You are recording. I don't see that, but I'm recording now too. Let me also advance to my next slide. And I want to use a quote that came to me today from Hafiz. And it says, "The rose, how did the rose ever open its heart and give to this world all of its beauty? It felt the encouragement of light against its being. Otherwise, we all remain too frightened." And this is from the poet Hafiz. So why it came to me today is I want to greet you with Eid Mubarak, a greeting of celebration, peace, and completion for those Muslims like me who perhaps have had the most unusual Ramadan of their lifetime. So that's how I came across this beautiful poem. First, I'd like to thank Laura Nalbandian for having the quick cardinal resolve to take this conference online when facing the prospect that it wouldn't happen at all. She has now emboldened several other astrologers and conference organizers to forge ahead when calamity would otherwise shut our meetings down. Live or virtually, the celestial renaissance continues. I'm proud to be part of her team. I am both grateful and congratulatory for other key members like her children, Aaron and Jen, her brother Greg, my colleagues Marcela Andalus, Rashonda Jefferson, Drew Ish, Jen E., Palace Augustine, and Nicholas Bolomanakos, and a host of other folks I know and don't know who made this awesome event happen. We are all privileged to be here. Earlier this year, before we knew that NORWAC would go completely online, I mentioned to Laura that NORWAC, as the 36th one that's happening, was coming off the heels of its Jupiter return. As I've said many times at NORWAC, Jupiter returns are times when we must decide to go big with fulfilling our life adventure, or stay home. But with this online conference, NORWAC got to go big with nearly 1,000 people from around the world attending, and we all got to stay home. So I think that is a way to go and show the beauty of astrology, Laura and team. Although Laura said earlier, the International Academy of Astrology has produced the Breaking Down the Borders online conference for 10 years, with the next one coming in November. This 2020 NORWAC will be known as the rising tide that lifts all of astrology's ships in the near and perhaps even distant future. Only the United Astrology Conferences, sponsored by AFAN, ESAR, and NCGR, has ever produced a conference as large as this, to my knowledge. But there's another return to mention here, Saturn's return to Aquarius. And how perfectly fitting that one of the symbols used for the NORWAC conference is the water bearer. I've also said several times at NORWAC and elsewhere that Saturn returns are times when a collective or community looks to see a return on investment that's been made into a person or a thing. It's a time to assume the role for which you've been selected for yourself, or that you selected for yourself, or has been elected for you by whatever. Saturn's venture into Aquarius augurs the Saturn return for the World Wide Web. This e-NORWAC would not be possible without the web. So the web is more than amply showing its investment value. But we astrologers, especially for those who've come to associate astrology and astrologers with Aquarius, must also be called on the carpet to prove our worth and value. This seems indeed the tone of mainstream news stories and news outlets like the New York Times when they publish hit pieces like, "Will coronavirus kill astrology?" operating on the assumption that astrologers didn't anticipate this as a dark time, when we did. But this keynote speech isn't going to be an apologia over what any of us already know in good conscience to be true. We don't need to number all our issues and questions now. That was the work I did or tried to do last year when I gave a morning keynote. Fitting that now I would give an evening and closing address as the sun nestles deep into the bosom of the earth here on the US East Coast. A fitting image to highlight how we as astrologers can find and use the light of astrology in dark times. Those of you who have signed up for this conference months ago might have noticed that my original keynote address was titled, "Can We Tame the Future?" Then a wild buck of a malady called SARS-CoV-19, yes, I used its whole name, came into the rodeo, and I'll be honest, I didn't have the stomach to ride that horse this year. I do believe that it's a topic to mount for another time, but I felt for a keynote address today that this topic or that topic was decidedly off key. But I felt for a keynote address that it was time to do something different. Most of us are not thinking as much about how we can tame the future as much as how we can survive it. Perhaps it is indeed a thought of hubris to even entertain that we can try to tame it even later. But I do believe tame isn't the right word. It's not the word we can seek even now. In fact, it's time to unleash something within us rather than to tame it. It's allowing our megawatt laser minds to shoot out what's been bound up within us. It's knowing that we live by the light and dark of cycles. That is this, whatever this is, it shall pass. Yet, this also requires us to reflect on some of our role as astrologers. I find myself reflecting on several things for that. So let me just stop the share for a second too, and focus here. First, I can't help but think of our Vedic brothers and sisters who call our sacred art of astrology Jyotish, the science of light. This is important since light has so many remarkable connotations in history. It is the quality of what illuminates and banishes darkness. It is radiant energy that also wards off cold, especially when something is burning. It is the word we use to ease a heavy burden or whatever has little weight. Yet, light has also been used as an instrument of oppression, like when we decide that darker-skinned people are bad, evil, or incompetent. Spiritually, light is what directs us to be role models and ethical in our dealings with clients and students. One of my teachers and now colleague, John Marcasella, often talks about how people come to astrologers as an act of last resort. They've tried to find clarity with every other kind of thing, and nothing else has worked. Whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, people come to us because they feel that there's a darkness encroaching on their minds and hearts, and they trust that looking to the bright stars of the night sky, that the people who track the motions of the sun and moon will not lead them astray. It is often my experience that we don't. I can say this as someone who has observed astrologers for over 30 years, reaped the benefits of their counsel as a client myself, and have sought to give such solace as well as a practitioner. But it's easy to lose sight of our role as light bearers when we start to see ourselves through the eyes of other people, especially folks who are openly hostile to us without taking enough time to know who we are or what we do, or even those who are innocently ignorant of what we do. Hit pieces like the recent Times article is one example, but there are others, and there will be more. Like when someone thinks the only thing you can be is a con artist, like what happened to me when I went on the Bill Nye show. And he had to ask me about that I make a lot of money, even though I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment in Newark, New Jersey. And we won't even talk about what he's in or what research scientists are in contrast. But I digress. Or the people or the guy who once in my hood thought I was a pimp because he observed many women who came to visit me in my home who looked tight or upset going in and happier going out. I didn't have the heart to tell him that his original thought would have made me more a gigolo than a pimp, but whatever. I explained to him that I was an astrologer, yet he was interested in learning astrology more for women than wisdom. Unsurprisingly, I never heard from him for classes. When confronting all of this from friends and family, strangers and media, we can become frustrated, angry, and exhausted, sinking into the darkness of ourselves, or strive to drop the best of our resources into efforts that will prove astrology's worth once and for all through empiricism or finding the perfect method or aspect of our art that will silence our critics forever. In the moment, we can come easily to believe that we can lift up the world singularly through what we know. An apt thing to consider as the nodes move or have shifted from Capricorn and Cancer to Gemini and Sagittarius. We move from what I call an axis of responsibility toward an axis of knowledge and understanding. We have two eclipses coming up along the Cap-Cancer axis still, one June 21st and the other one July 4th. These celestial parting shots provide us with clues about how we might sustain ourselves so that we can do the same for others. So a couple things to consider, at least 4 points or 5 points I want to make. We must continue to be excellent stewards of our past and heritage. So we actually have been doing over the last 30 years, or maybe 40 years, great work in excavating the work of our history and our tradition in terms of Hellenistic astrology, medieval astrology. And so we have been taking care of our tradition. We're now doing the same in excavating and what we are discovering and learning more about American astrology, early English astrology, and even going now to excavating and looking closer at the 20th century. But number 2, we can't be slaves to our glorious past and heritage. Just because some dead white man said it doesn't have to be true. So that's one thing to consider and know as truth, that we can get beyond that and to realize that we can see that we can honor the past, but at the same time, we have a strong imperative, a moral imperative to think more about the future, something that Bear River was talking about with intersectionality in his talk today. We must take excellent care of ourselves. And when I say excellent care of ourselves, that's not just because of this COVID virus thing, but also in terms of what happens with just daily aspects of living. You know, whether we're saging our apartments and saging our spaces as we see clients, to take care of ourselves in terms of bathing regularly, which I know some people do, but you know, some people may not. But really to nurture yourself, to care for yourself. And I think it's important to take excellent care of each other as my 4th point. And that means not just in terms of when we're in crisis, but especially when we're in crisis, when someone has lost a home to fire, or someone is facing the prospect of death or ill health through cancer, but also when we're not necessarily in crisis, to check on each other and not to let our ideas and perspectives cloud our minds so much that we lose sight of our colleague, of our friend, and not take care of that person. We must also strive to take excellent care of our planet, even as we talk about other planets. You know, it's amazing that we can hear astrologers who will talk about Jupiter and whether Jupiter rules Pisces or it's Neptune, and not give a damn about what's happening on the planet around them, and not talk about whether they're recycling or whether they're taking care of the resources that we have to value, or the animals that are around us. So I think that is also part of our stewardship as we move from the Capricorn Cancer axis into Sagittarius and Gemini. So I think these are the important things to consider as well. All this helps to stoke a light, a fire that already burns in our hearts. Perhaps this is the deeper message that William Lilly sought to relay in his 1647 epistle to the student in astrology at the beginning of his Christian Astrology, Volume 1. Here are some choice tidbits I'd like to highlight. In the first place, consider and admire thy Creator, and be thankful unto him will forgive his gender ignorance. Be thou humble, and let no natural knowledge, how profound or transcendent soever it be, elate thy mind to neglect divine providence, by whose all-seeing order and appointment all things heavenly and earthly have their constant motion. The more thy knowledge is enlarged, the more do thou magnify the power and wisdom of Almighty God, Goddess, and strive to preserve thyself in his favor, her favor. For the mighty holy thou art, and more nearer to God, the pure judgment thou shalt give. So one of the things that really impresses me about what Lily is saying at this particular point is really keeping our mind on things that are transcendent. We could say heavenly, but we also could talk about what's ideal. We also could talk about, and this is also related to Platonic ideas, but that last part, for the more holy thou art. And I might even say, maybe even channeling my inner Jason Holly here, whole, not just holy. The more nearer to God, the purer judgment thou shalt give. He also says, do not then for shame deface thy nature or make thyself unworthy of such gifts, or deprive thyself of that great power, glory, and blessedness God hath allotted thee, by casting from thee his favor for possession of a few imperfect pleasures. I believe William Lilly is saying here, don't throw your ish out just for likes on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. He was a prophet, y'all. He saw that. So it's more so to understand that it's important for us to realize that we are attuned to a higher principle, a higher goal, rather than just like someone going along to your tweet or your Facebook and going like, I like that. That's wonderful. As thou daily conversest with the heavens, so instruct and form thy mind according to the image of divinity. So whatever divinity is for you, I'm not prescribing anyone's sense of divinity because it's broad and as vast as the sea, as the ocean, as the earth itself. So we can talk about your ideal, what you venerate, what is in your heart. And so that is what we have to also stay focused on as our sense of light. Our ability to dispense wisdom correlates to how vulnerable we are willing to receive wisdom within ourselves. We must both let the spirit and the world penetrate within us, and our holiness comes from the alchemy of this sacred work. With the lunar nodal axis shift, what's divine, whatever we deem the light, presses us to grasp the difference between what you know and what you understand. Knowledge includes book smarts and what we learn in environments like what we're experiencing at this conference, but we can also come to know things and glean insights from insatiable curiosity and creating unlikely combinations for communication and teaching. This matches beautifully the calling we'll likely feel as Jupiter and Saturn conjoin together in Aquarius, an air sign, in December. But we can't forget the fiery part of the polarity here. We can't forget the light. Although the South Node is in Sagittarius, we must seek to preserve the understanding of the South Node just as we seek to restore what has been lost in the North Node in Gemini. This puts us along the path of wisdom. We may become more meta about whatever messages we look to share and the knowledge we've learned. We may become less satisfied and smug in quoting source texts and aspire more to share what we've experienced and learned from our own lives. We may learn from this moment of isolation to cultivate more understanding and reflection in our lives rather than be so busy that we're no longer taking care of business, i.e., taking care of ourselves, each other, or our mission and vision as astrologers. Perhaps we can gain 2020 vision in 2020 after all. And there may be something else for us to contemplate. For the last year or so, I have been steeped in study about daemons and the fates. also known as the Morai, but maybe we may need to remember the Musai just as much, otherwise known as the Muses, both in how we are inspired and inspire. Perhaps that's why there are 9 muses and only 3 fates, because we're encouraged 3 times more to honor and cherish all that makes us mortal and human. And indeed, when our star tribe gathers, even only through flickering screens like this, we have reason to sing, dance, bob our heads with poesy, and more all in the name of the eldest muse, Urania, the muse of astronomy and astrology. And all of this catapults us into the times we face ahead. The waning days of Venus's retrograde, eclipses dancing along the remainder of the Cancer-Capricorn lunar node axis, Sag and Gemini eclipses, Mars retrograde, Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the Saturn-Uranus square coming, and the now even more prominent Pluto return for the United States of America. It appears as if we have some difficult, even dark days ahead. But we must be careful not to gloss those days over by thinking about the grand, sweeping ways the light seems snuffed out of the world. Hope and faith can defade slowly and imperceptibly with no headlines. Fear, a scarcity mentality, panic, the deepest pits of grief and despair might more likely be what we hear from our 2:00 p.m. appointment on a bright Saturday morning right at the start of summer. Or what screams out of our minds when we feel some scratchiness at the back of our own throats. Or when we're flummoxed by looking at our progressed moon saddling along a transiting Saturn, or if we didn't attend Kelly Surtees' class on progressions to know what the hell that even means. It's easy to confuse fate as an act of divine providence, but the true wisdom is to know your role in the moment. Let me share a little story with you to illustrate. And before I do that, let me get a swig of water. Once a seeker of wisdom was wandering through a forest and happened upon a fox that had lost its legs. "How does the poor thing manage to survive?" the dervish said to himself. Just then, a tiger happened along carrying its prey. The tiger ate what it wanted and left the rest for the fox. The next day, the dervish came back and the same thing happened. "So that's how it's done," thought the dervish. "I'll try the same." So he went home, sat in a corner, and waited for the universe to provide for him. He waited for days, and nothing came. Finally, becoming famished, he heard a voice. "You're following the wrong example. You have legs. Be like the tiger, not the fox." That's from Neil Douglas Klotz's The Sufi Book of Life. So, yes, we must be like the tiger. Not to become voracious or hungry like a beast of prey, but more a being who prays for the benefit and growth of others, and then one who rises to the occasion as a possible agent of liberation, deliverance, support, nurturance, and yes, a beacon of light for others. That we might see ourselves more as the benefics, Jupiter and Venus, that we so often discuss in our work. We instead focus on our role as providers to the discontented rather than just being merely content providers. We must be a light while attending to the light in all of us. This simple truth of our luminous heritage we must not only carry in our minds, but also in our hearts and outstretched hands. This is what I encourage you to take with you from here, my friends, my wonder-eyed siblings of our star tribe. And then share that light with our Mother Earth, the winged ones, the swimmers, the crawlers, the root nation, the plant nation, the tree nation, the sky nation, our grandfather stones, the four-legged, the two-legged, the peg-legged, and the no-legged, for we are all one. Blessings of light, love, and truth to you all. Amin, Ashe, and Aho. That's it. Thank you. That's my wife.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
You have a little bit of time. Do you want to see what people, maybe they have some questions for you? You want to take some?
Yeah, I can take questions.
Let's see what we've got. So I'm not going to scroll back into any questions. So if anybody has some questions now, somebody said you can drop the mic now.
Hey, Sam, I like how you brought in different worlds and the Vedic world. You acknowledged everybody, so thank you.
Somebody wants you to do this as a daily podcast.
All right.
Sunday service. You picked up, sort of picked up the mantle of our dear friend Rob Hand, who used to call his Sunday lectures the Sunday sermon.
There you go. Yeah, the former preacher. Will I publish this somewhere? Sure. I mean, I don't know. Where can I publish this?
Publish it wherever you like, I guess.
I'll do it on my blog. I'll do it tomorrow on my blog.
There you go. Let's see.
I just saw
People
something.
are saying that this spoke to them.
Good.
You know, and yeah, they're just all about this. It was very inspiring. Thank you for your kind words about all the work we've done here at NORWAC. It was.
No, I love working with you, and you know.
I love working with you, Sam.
You know that we've been doing this. Sorry, go on.
No, I think we made this comment earlier. We've come to know each other as you're like a brother to me, and I'm happy to have you as my family. And we've been working closely now for, what has it been? Has it been 5 years?
5 years.
Yeah, we did UAC together. We've been working on the diversity scholarship. Why don't you tell people about what we've done?
Well, yeah, I want to talk about the diversity scholarship because we, one thing I lament, so I want to say to the diversity scholarship winners this year that, you know, one thing I miss is that we didn't have a breakfast for you this year. Just because we're in all different time zones. I did think about it, but I was like, well, it might be weird, you know, like 3:30 in the morning or 7:30. Like, yeah, let's have breakfast or whatever. But what the diversity scholarship is, and I talked a little bit on another point. It was Nicholas Polymenakos about almost 6 years ago, coming to Laura Nalbandian, or Laura Nalbandian coming to Nicholas.
Yeah, I called Nicholas.
Yeah, coming to Nicholas and saying, do you know someone who can help me with this diversity scholarship? Because I want to see greater diversity at NORWAC. And I want people to know the significance of that, because at the same time that Laura was talking about that, I was literally fighting with someone who will remain nameless, on the board of directors, who said, like, why do we need to, you know, have diversity? If people want to come, they can come. No one's stopping them. There's no signs up that says that, you know, no blacks allowed. If black people aren't coming, then that's on them. Literally, this is verbatim someone who said this to me. But Laura is being proactive and wanting to do something. So Nicholas mentioned me. I started talking to Laura. And then we came up with the ways in which we could do this. And this is what's happened. What this person on this board also would say is that, well, we're just giving handouts, and, you know, how is that going to help our community? This is what I want to talk about particularly. That first year, we had, I don't remember the exact number, but it was like
10?
maybe it was 10. Because I know 8 or 10. But among that number, I just want to mention someone particularly is Zion Gray, who was my roommate that first year that we had the scholarship.
That's right.
And what's significant about Zion in this particular case is that Zion came the next year to NORWAC, but he paid his way and then had a room where he hosted people. And among the people he also hosted in terms of like, when I say hosted people, meaning like it was like the AFAM room, but it was for diversity scholarship winners. It wasn't even that officially, it was just how it fell out. But one of the people who was also there and from that class, or among the two people, were Colin Badel and Chartreuse Tembo. I'm going to mess up her last name, but you know Chartreuse. Miss Chartreuse. Yep. Thank you. So Miss Chartreuse. Now, what's significant is that, as I just said, Zion had paid his way and then was supporting other people. Then we have Chartreuse and Colin, who now have got books and have written for like tarot.com and other things. So what I'm saying to you is that when we invest in our community and we broaden our community, then our community will transform and then more will blossom. And NORWAC, again, was at the cutting edge of this. I will say this, I'm going to go on record and say it. Even my beloved organization, ESAR, hasn't caught up.
Nope.
NCGR has not caught up, right? AFAN gives out scholarships, so we're not even going to put them on the table. So I think when I say put them on the table, we're not going to call them on the carpet. I'm just saying this out loud.
Right.
So I think it's important to recognize and to also call on our organizations, listen, diversity is important. And that diversity isn't just about, well, we need people who also acknowledge Vedic astrology and harmonic astrology. And, I know I'm terrible with these voices, but that's how they sound to me. Because if we're not talking about gender equity, if we're not talking about in terms of aspects of class, gender, race, and that's the world I came from, right? Then I don't think we're doing the real thing, the real work. So I think this is really the important thing. And this is why I want to give kudos to Laura, but also to Nicholas Polymonakos. I just like saying his last name.
It's great, right? It just rolls.
It's like Polymonakos, And, so in terms of making this happen, and this is not, I use Colin and I talked about it, but we can talk about Janelle Belgrave. We can talk about Mecca Woods, who's also been a recipient of it, right? So these different people, we're going to see, we've seen them blow up, and I expect even the recipients this year, we believe in you. And the thing to know, this is for next year, and I'm going to be also, transparent about this. People like, well, what are you considering when we take on people for coming into the scholarship?
Yes, please do tell them, because it is very specific. We are looking for something,
right? Yeah. And it's not just like, oh, well, I applied and I have needs. We understand people have financial needs. We also understand that, you may be a woman of color, you may be a queer woman of color, you may be queer, you may bi, however you want to designate yourself as among the different groups that we talk about that have been marginalized. But what we're looking for is work. What have you done? How have you demonstrated your value, your willingness to be part of this community? Mm-hmm. That's key. So saying to me or saying to Laura, it's like, well, I love astrology. Literally, I'm just going to be real. I'm like, oh, that's nice. So does he. We all love astrology. Okay, that's great. But how are you willing to demonstrate what you're willing to give? Are you active in any organizations? Are you active? It doesn't have to be ESAR, or it doesn't have to be NCGR. In your local community. Are you also invested in meeting other astrologers? Are you an AYA? All these different things matter in terms of how you are willing to be active in this community and willing to demonstrate your sense and your commitment. Because we have lots of people who like, oh, I want to study astrology, and we never hear from again. That's what we learned over these 5 years. Right. That the people who are invested and do the work stay active and do more. But the people who kind of like, oh, I just love astrology, they say, okay, thanks, bye. And we don't hear from them. So I think this is what we
And
want.
NORWAC's had a long history on something that my mother and I were very intent on. We started out with gender parity, putting as many women speakers and sometimes a little bit more as men, and then putting women in keynote positions and making sure they had an equal number of workshops. And the after a while, it had been bothering me, just to give a little backstory, it had been bothering me for a while and began to do some research. And that's when I got frustrated and called Nicholas. And that's when I said, look, I've hit a dead end. I don't know what to do, but this is really important. And I need to have allies in this. And that's when he put me in touch with Sam. And so we have been partners in this process of bringing diversity, because the reality is not only have our astrology conferences historically been white from an attendee level, they have been even whiter from a speaker level. And so I would say a major intention for both Sam and I in our process of investing in the future is that we're trying to find those that we can elevate up into that position, so that the diversity of the voices of astrology are not just white and, pardon me, white males. So it's important. There are more views and more perspectives to be had in our community, and it is time, and more than time, for those voices to be heard. And NORWAC will continue, and I make that commitment, we will continue to support diversity of age, of ethnicity, of ability, of gender disparity, whatever it might be. We are all about reaching underserved and marginalized sectors of our community. In fact, my goal, hopefully, if I can pull it together, I see you, John Chinworth, we've had discussions about this, is bringing in something for the deaf community. This is a community that is completely kept out of our world, of the conference world. And so very possibly with the, certainly the potential of combining virtual with on-site, certainly with the virtual and Zoom providing process for ASL and the like, that is our next frontier. And I am looking for, certainly the support energetically from the astrological community to bring this on board, because again, just as other communities have had a difficult time getting into these conferences, the deaf community has been completely shut out unless they can bring their own interpreters. So that is our goal, our next frontier, as I said.
Yep. Yeah. So this is wonderful. So this is a standard that not only this conference is set, but also that what we can see more in terms of our community. So I think it's also going to be requiring other people to reach out to different organizations, to different astrology conferences, and ask these questions and to make these statements. There are people, and now I'm going to speak on from a different angle. One of the things that, hey, Vernon, there's Vernon. All right. And I was just about to talk about this. One of the things that, and I might get a little verklempt and a little emotional about, as Wade said, and I've said, I've been learning and practicing and working with astrology for over 30 years. And for a long time, I lived, either I had to go into like a private world of MySpace or a Facebook group to meet other Black astrologers, and not connect. And there were so few of us and very few women. And what I've seen now is an explosion of women, particularly Black women, women of color, particularly of all strata. And then also in terms of our willingness to enter spaces that have been predominantly white. And my whole take on that is not like, oh, we're integrating, as much as like we're bum rushing, right? Right. And that we're also, and I don't see myself like, okay, yeah, maybe on some level, people like Demetrius Bagley and myself and Basil Farrington, Vernon Robinson, right? We're pioneers. We paved the way. But now you have to go bigger, better, defer. Okay, I had to do that. There's ways in which you have to go beyond. And I think and I'm not just, I'm speaking from my experience as a Black man, but I'm talking about to all people of color and all different trajectories of being marginalized. And I think that's important because when I would talk to other Black astrologers, the conversation would often veer toward like, well, they don't want us there. And I don't want to go anywhere where they don't want us, right? And on some level, I understand that, but on some level, then we also have to make that happen.
Yeah.
Rather than just kind of like, well, I'm just going to go off and be like, like the dervish, like, well, I'm going to wait to see what happens rather than being the tiger, rather than being like the tiger to make it happen. So, sorry.
And I think that it's also when we talk about diversity and people of color, we have given scholarships to Hispanic, Native American, Middle Eastern, and trans, transgendered, you name it, it comes up. And so we are not limiting our diversity scholarship. We want a broad spectrum and rainbow effect in our conferences. So know that, we have, didn't we, who did we give? Well, I don't want to name names, but there's Asian and, we've given out, it's across the board.
Right, and it can be complicated. Like, for instance, I mentioned Zion Gray. Zion Gray is not only Black, but a Black trans man. So, right. It can be along a spectrum.
Exactly. So I think that my mother was a trailblazer. I have picked up the mantle of being the trailblazer. I believe in what I do. I do what I do because it's right, the right thing to do. And I believe the hard things are the right things to do. And to be honest, this wasn't hard. It was just doing it and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. NORWAC donates all of the registrations. And when we do in-person conferences, we raise funds so that our recipients have some extra cash to defer against their travel and their lodging. It's not always a lot, but we try to raise as much as we can. The good news from this year is that the money we raised last year is going to roll over into next year. So the more money we can raise, the more we can offer to these folks, and they can use it as, again, to defer against their travel, their lodging. They can apply it to workshops, whatever they'd like. So NORWAC donates, and we gave out 15 diversity scholarships this year, plus I gave out probably another 10 different types of scholarships, partial scholarships. So we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 scholarships that NORWAC has given out. We've been doing this. We've been giving scholarships previously, not to the diversity scholarship. We've been giving scholarships probably since 2002, maybe somewhere in there. So it's something that we've always believed in, and it was just taking it to the next step to develop the diversity scholarship. And I couldn't be more proud of what we've done at NORWAC. I just couldn't. It pleases me more than anything, to be honest.
Hey, can I chime in here and say something? Because you're
Please.
talking about trailblazing, and I'm pulling up the chart of NORWAC. We're coming back to this chart, and I'm looking at where the sun is in this chart. You got sun, the midheaven, and Mercury in Aries in the 9th house.
Can you share it?
I'm on another computer. I
can share it.
You can share it. Go for it. Let's do this a little bit.
You guys talk for a moment while I get the chart.
Yeah, because it just hit me because I'm like, I went back to this chart again and about trailblazing and I just thinking I had to look at it again, and I saw just that expansion, trailblazing, and there's the Aries sun, And there's the ninth
Computer's
house. Right?
taking its time.
Yeah, and it takes people gathering things together and also creating spaces. So for instance, Bear River talked about today, along with Shakira, I'm going to blank on some, Aaron Shipley, and Diana Rose Harper, they created an organization together, or they're creating an organization. Micah, I forget what it stands for because we couldn't remember at the time. They're about to do it in there. Right, there is in the chat. Which is also going to talk about intersectionality and more to start a different conversation. So this is how change happens. The more that we kind of sit and complain, and I'll just say it, bitch and moan, nothing gets done, right? So it's more about taking action and seizing it. Again, I have to quote it again, be like the tiger.
Yeah, so there it is. That's the chart.
There's Ceres there too with the sun.
Yeah, Ceres on the sun. Did my big Ceres talk today. What's fascinating about this chart that I haven't looked at in a while, it's been years since I looked at it, and we pulled it up the other day, and my natal Mercury is 10 Capricorn. My natal Saturn is 1 Capricorn. My South Node is 16 Aries. My Ceres is 15 Scorpio. My Mars is 21 Taurus, opposing that Mars. I mean, my chart is just lit up by this, and I just didn't realize it until 2 days ago when we brought it up at another point. It was just like, holy cow.
Hey, Laura, can I just I've never seen the NORWAC chart before.
Sure.
And something that's interesting to me is that Mars at 27 degrees of Scorpio.
Yeah, it's conjunct my Jupiter. That's it. I have Jupiter.
Well, that's a good deal. But here's something that's a little bit interesting. The day that the World Health Organization was first notified about the coronavirus, Mars was at 27 degrees of Scorpio.
Really?
And yeah, and in this chart, Mars rules your midheaven. So, taking a look at this, I think it's quite interesting knowing that NORWAC was able to make something really productive and still profitable and positive and inclusive and happy from a situation that's terrible and obviously quite distressing. So it's interesting to see that 27 Scorpio be repeated and have that kind of connection back to the actual virus itself.
And I see the diversity as the North Node in Gemini in the 11th, ruled by the Mercury up there in the 10th. That's where I would see the diversity. What do you guys think?
I do too. Actually, I was
Yeah.
thinking about it because we're having a nodal return. And Sam, are you there?
I'm here, right here. Mm-hmm.
When I interviewed you for the promo, did we talk about your own chart with this chart? I
I
can't
don't
remember.
think so. I've never seen this chart.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
Mm-mm.
Do you have any connections to this chart?
Yeah, I do. I mean, like my sun is at 29 degrees Scorpio. So there's one, key point. My midheaven is 17 degrees Sag, so it's trine to the Mercury up there. So yeah, there's some powerful connections, so yeah, that's really deep.
And the way we started this, with the Pluto in the 4th from an evolutionary point of view, some of you don't use the outer planets, but from the evolutionary point of view, this Pluto in the 4th is about family.
Mm-hmm.
Family connections, family roots, family intention, transforming everybody. And that's the one thing about NORWAC that people talk about, and they certainly talk about it at other conferences, but I get so much of it is that this conference changes people's lives. I just got an email from somebody that said it changed their life. And that is what NORWAC's about, making connections with other people that change the course of their life in ways they couldn't have known prior to being here.
Right.
All right, thank you, everyone. Do you want to take it away, Mr.
Here,
Wade?
yeah, sure. Hold on a second.
Sam.
Thank you.
What?
Yeah, just for the video, because I have to stop it, but let's end with Sam. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Amazing closing lecture, my friend.
Thank you.
It was very inspiring.
Good. That's what I wanted to happen. I want people to feel like they're ready to go out there and bring the light and find it and use it.
Right
Thank
on.
you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm going to stop this and then we'll keep going.